She lied in every single letter she wrote him. 7 letters, 7 lies. And the biggest one was growing inside her belly. Her family had thrown her out, handed her $300, a one-way ticket west, and told her never to come back. The father of her child had vanished to Europe with another woman, and now she was standing in the dust of a Utah town, shaking hands with the stranger she was about to marry. A man so honest it hurt to look him in the eye. He had already been abandoned once. The last bride took one look at his cabin and disappeared before sunrise. He never told a soul. And now here she was, cinching her corset tighter every morning, hiding a secret that no amount of fabric could hold much longer. When the truth finally broke open, in the worst possible place, in front of the worst possible people, it set off a chain of events that nearly destroyed them both. But what she did next, 7 months pregnant, covered in soot, standing alone in a courtroom, that will change the way you think about courage. This story reminds us that where you come from doesn't decide who you become. Your choices do. And sometimes the life you were pushed into against your will turns out to be the life you would have chosen all along. Welcome to Cowboy Dusk channel, where the prairie wind carries stories that stay with you long after the sun goes down. Here we tell tales of the untamed West, of love that's earned through dust and fire, of women who found their strength where no one expected, of men who learned that real courage isn't building walls but tearing them down, and of the quiet mercy that holds people together when everything else falls apart. If these are the stories your heart has been searching for, you're right where you belong. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.
Genevieve Morrison had written 7 letters to the man who was about to become her husband, and in every single one, she had lied to him at least once. The stagecoach rattled over another rut in the road, and Genevieve pressed her palm flat against her stomach beneath the layers of her traveling dress. The corset was cinched so tight she could barely draw a full breath, but that was the price of keeping her secret hidden for a few more hours. Outside the coach window, the landscape stretched in every direction like something God had started and then abandoned halfway through. Red dust, sagebrush, a sky so wide and blue it made her chest ache, though that might have been the corset. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap, soft, white, the hands of a girl who had never scrubbed a floor or wrung a chicken neck or kneaded bread for a family. She wondered how long it would take for this country to change them. 4 months ago, she had been Genevieve Morrison of the Philadelphia Morrisons, a merchant family of respectable standing and considerable pride. She had attended concerts at the Academy of Music. She had worn silk gloves to charity luncheons. She had been courted by Edward Hale, son of the Third National Bank president, who had whispered promises in her ear during evening walks through Rittenhouse Square, and then vanished to Europe with a new bride the moment she told him about the baby. The memory still burned. Not the heartbreak, because whatever she had felt for Edward had died the instant she saw his face go pale and his eyes go calculating. What burned was the aftermath. Her father slamming a newspaper onto the dining room table, the page folded open to a small advertisement in the western columns. Rancher seeks wife, must be willing to work hard. Good land, honest living. Her mother weeping into a handkerchief. Aunt Clara, practical and cold as January, sitting down that same evening to compose the first reply letter on Genevieve's behalf. A young widow she had written in her careful hand, industrious and of good health, seeking a fresh start in the Western Territories. Genevieve had not chosen to become a mail-order bride. She had been pushed, handed $300, a single trunk of belongings, and a one-way ticket to a place she could not have found on a map. Her family wanted the scandal buried, and Genevieve was the shovel. But something unexpected had happened during the exchange of letters that followed. The man who wrote back was not what she expected. Lucas Kane wrote the way he apparently lived, plain and honest, with no wasted words and no false charm. He described his ranch with quiet pride. He asked her questions about her life, real questions, not the polished small talk of Philadelphia drawing rooms. He told her about the mountains that turned purple at sunset and the creek that sang over the rocks behind his cabin. He told her he was lonely, and he said it without shame. Genevieve had begun to care about Lucas Kane through those letters, and that made the lying worse, because she was deceiving a good man, and she knew it, and she did it anyway because she had no other door left open. The stagecoach lurched to a stop. Genevieve peered through the dusty window and saw what would be her new home. Monticello, Utah territory was a scatter of rough buildings along a wide dirt road, baking under a May sun that hit with a force she had never experienced back east. The Abajo Mountains rose blue and distant to the west. The air smelled of sagebrush and dry earth, and something she could not name, something open and ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of human beings. It was smaller than she had imagined, harsher, more desolate than anything the letters had prepared her for. The driver opened the door and offered his hand. Genevieve took it and stepped down onto the dirt street, feeling the heat press against her like a living thing. She straightened her traveling dress and lifted her chin and tried to look like a woman who had chosen to be here. He was standing by the hitching post, tall, lean, sun-darkened, with gray eyes and dark blonde hair that needed cutting. He was turning his hat brim in his hands, and she realized with a small shock that he was nervous. This broad-shouldered rancher who probably wrestled cattle and chopped wood and rode through storms was nervous about meeting her. He was not handsome in the way Philadelphia gentlemen were handsome. His face was too angular, his jaw too sharp, his hands too rough. But something in his expression suggested he had never broken a promise in his life. And in that moment, standing in the dust and the heat with a lie wrapped around her like the corset she could barely breathe through, Genevieve found that more attractive than any polished charm. He stepped forward, removed his hat entirely. "Good afternoon, Miss Morrison. I am Lucas Kane." He paused. "I hope the journey was not too hard on you." His voice was low and steady, and it matched his letters perfectly. Genevieve felt her throat tighten. "The journey was long," she said. "But I am glad to be here, Mr. Kane." He looked at her a beat too long. She saw something flicker across his face. Not pleasure. Something more complicated. Doubt, maybe. As if he were wondering why a woman who looked like her would need to answer a mail order advertisement. As if he were already afraid she would leave. He carried her trunk without being asked. He offered his arm to cross the rutted street. He spoke little, but what he said was careful and kind, and Genevieve felt the guilt settle deeper into her chest with every step. At the boarding house, a woman in her 50s was waiting on the porch. She had sharp eyes, flour-dusted hands, and the bearing of someone who had survived enough hardship to stop being impressed by it. "You must be the bride," the woman said. "I am Martha Jenkins. Your cousin, more or less. Come inside before the sun cooks you through." Martha led Genevieve to a small room on the second floor while Lucas waited downstairs. The moment the door closed, Martha turned and fixed Genevieve with a stare that could have stripped paint. "How far along are you?" she said. It was not a question. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. "I do not know what you mean. Child, I have been watching women walk through my door for 20 years. I can tell by the way you sit down, the way that corset does not quite do what you think it does, and the way you put your hand on your belly every time you think nobody is looking. So I will ask again, how far along?" Genevieve sat on the edge of the bed, her hands were trembling. "Almost 4 months," she whispered. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Does Lucas know?" "No. Please. You cannot tell him. If he finds out, he will send me away, and I have nowhere else to go." Martha studied her. "And the father of this child? Gone. Married to someone else. In Europe." Martha let out a long breath through her nose. "How long do you think you can hide this child? That belly is not going to wait for you to find your courage. Please, Genevieve said again, just give me time. Martha agreed to say nothing, but as she left the room, she paused in the doorway. I will keep your secret, she said quietly. But you should know that when it comes out, and it will come out, you will not be the only one who gets hurt. That boy downstairs has already been broken by people he trusted. Think about that. The door closed and Genevieve was alone. She sat in the small room and listened to Lucas' voice drifting up from downstairs as he talked with Martha. She could not make out the words, but she heard her name, and the warmth in his voice when he said it made her want to weep. He was speaking about her with hope, and she was about to destroy it. Lucas Kane had never cooked breakfast for anyone but himself, and he was currently burning his third batch of biscuits in a row. He stood in the small kitchen of his cabin at 4 a.m, staring at the blackened lumps in the cast-iron pan, and wondered if a woman from Philadelphia would take one look at this place and run. The last one had. He scraped the biscuits into the slop bucket and started again. While the dough came together under his rough hands, he thought about why he was doing this. Not the biscuits. All of it. 6 months ago, he had been riding home at dusk past the Henderson place. And he had seen Tom Henderson walk toward his front porch where his wife stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, calling him in for supper. Their boy, maybe 4 years old, had come running around the corner of the house and launched himself at his father's legs. Henderson had scooped the child up with one arm and kissed his wife with the other, and the three of them had gone inside together, and the door had closed, and the lamplight had glowed warm through the windows. Lucas had sat on his horse in the gathering dark and felt something crack open inside his chest. A loneliness so deep it frightened him. He had built this ranch from nothing. 2 years of hired work, every penny saved, then a homestead claim and 80 head of starter cattle. He had a good piece of land with a creek running through it and a cabin he had raised with his own 2 hands. But he came home every night to silence, and the silence was killing him by inches. He had placed the advertisement the next week. The first woman who answered had arrived 3 months later. She was pleasant enough in her letters, but when she stepped off the stagecoach and saw the cabin, the isolation, the endless grassland rolling to the mountains, something in her face had closed like a shutter. She stayed one night. By sunrise, she was gone, back on the next stagecoach without leaving so much as a note. Lucas had told no one, not Martha, not anyone. He had put out 2 plates for breakfast that morning, and then stood staring at them for a long time before putting one back in the cupboard. He set out 2 plates now, stared at them. This time will be different, he told himself. It has to be. He picked up Genevieve at the boarding house after breakfast. She wore a different dress today, lighter colored, with a shawl around her shoulders despite the heat. She smiled when she saw him, and that smile hit him somewhere behind the ribs in a way he was not prepared for. He helped her into the wagon and drove her out to see the ranch. He showed her the cabin, small but solid. The horse corral, the cattle spread across the grassland, and the creek, bright and cold, running over smooth stones. That creek is the lifeblood of this ranch, he said. Without it, nothing lives out here. Genevieve looked at the land with an expression he could not read. She asked questions, good ones, specific and practical. How many head of cattle? How far to town? What grew in this soil? Then she asked him something that surprised him entirely. Would you teach me to ride a horse? She said. Lucas looked at her. In his experience, city women wanted nothing to do with horses. You want to learn to ride. If I am going to live on a ranch, I should know how to ride. Do you not think so? He felt the corner of his mouth pull up. I think that is about the most sensible thing I have heard in a long time, Miss Morrison. On the way back to town, they passed the boundary fence that marked the edge of Lucas' property. 3 riders appeared on the far side, and the one in front walked his horse forward with the easy confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. He was broad and well-dressed for a cattleman, with a silver watch chain and a hat that cost more than most men's boots. Silas Drummond. Lucas felt his shoulders tighten. Well now, Drummond said, reining up. So you have found yourself a bride after all. He turned his gaze on Genevieve, and Lucas did not like the way those cold eyes moved over her. I hope she knows what she is stepping into. Miss Morrison, this is Silas Drummond, Lucas said evenly. He owns the ranch north of mine. And south, Drummond added with a thin smile. Your place sits right between my two parcels, Kane, always has. He tipped his hat to Genevieve. Welcome to Monticello, ma'am. I trust we will be seeing each other. He rode away with his men. Lucas sat rigid on the wagon seat, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. Genevieve waited a moment, then said quietly, "There is more to that than a friendly greeting between neighbors." Lucas let out a breath. Drummond wants my land. He has been buying up every small ranch in the valley. I told him no. He did not take it well. He forced a smile. But that is nothing for you to worry about. She did not look convinced. That evening, after Lucas dropped her at the boarding house, Genevieve helped Martha wash the supper dishes. Martha handed her a plate and said, almost casually, "You are not the first mail-order bride Lucas has received, you know." Genevieve went still. "What do you mean?" "The one before you arrived took one look at that cabin and was gone by morning. Did not say a word, just vanished." "He never told you that, did he?" Genevieve shook her head slowly. Martha dried her hands on her apron. "He will not talk about it. But I saw what it did to him. That boy has been abandoned by everyone he ever trusted. His father died at Shiloh before Lucas was old enough to remember his face. His mother married a man who swindled her out of everything and left her to die in poverty. And then the one woman he asked to share his life just left." Martha fixed Genevieve with her hard stare. "So when your secret comes out, and it will, you should understand what it will do to him. It will not just be about the lie. It will be about every other time someone he trusted walked away." Genevieve stood at the wash basin, her hands in the cooling water, and felt the weight of what she was doing settle on her like stones. That night she stood before the mirror in her room and loosened her corset. Her belly was unmistakable now in profile, a gentle curve that no amount of boning and lacing could hide much longer. Time was running out. She wanted to tell Lucas the truth, but if she did, he would cancel the wedding, and she would be alone, pregnant, with $300 and nowhere in the world to go. Tomorrow was the last of the 3 days they had agreed upon. Tomorrow she would have to decide. Tell the truth and lose everything, or stay silent and build a new life on a lie. But Genevieve did not know that someone else had already made a choice for her. And by morning, that choice would be irreversible. Genevieve Morrison said "I do" at 2:00 on a Wednesday afternoon, and by 2:15 she was a married woman and still a liar. She had woken that morning with a plan. She had spent half the night composing in her head the words she would say to Lucas, how she would explain everything, the pregnancy, the lies in the letters, the family that had cast her out. She had rehearsed it until the words felt smooth enough to speak without choking on them. She came downstairs early and found Martha in the kitchen, already working the stove. "I need to tell him," Genevieve said, "before anything else happens. I need to tell him today." Martha set down her coffee cup and looked at her steadily. "Then you had better do it quick, child. Lucas was here at 6 this morning. Said he does not need more time. He wants to marry today." The floor seemed to shift under Genevieve's feet. "Today. But we still have one more day. He said he has seen enough. He said you are the one." Martha fixed her with a hard look. "If you have something to say it now. Do not let it fester past the vows." Genevieve opened her mouth to reply, but the front door of the boarding house opened, and Lucas walked in. He was wearing his best shirt, a clean white one she had not seen before, and a string tie. His boots were brushed, his hair was combed, and he was holding a bundle of wildflowers, desert blooms of yellow and purple that he must have picked at dawn, because some of the petals still held dew. He smiled when he saw her, and the smile transformed his whole face. It was open and unguarded and full of a hope so raw that it made her throat close up entirely. "Morning, Genevieve," he said, and he held out the flowers. She could not speak, not because she was weak, and not because she was a coward, though later she would wonder about both. She could not speak because she saw genuine happiness on his face, maybe for the first time since she had met him, and she could not bring herself to shatter it. The words she had rehearsed all night dissolved on her tongue. Martha watched from the kitchen doorway. Their eyes met. Martha shook her head slowly, but she said nothing. They were married at the courthouse by Judge Whitfield, a lean man with spectacles and a dry voice who performed the ceremony with brisk efficiency. Martha stood as witness. Genevieve wore a dress Martha had helped her alter to accommodate her changing figure, high-waisted with extra fabric gathered beneath the bust. She held the wildflowers and tried to stop her hands from trembling. Lucas' hand shook when he took hers to say the vows. His voice was steady, though, every word deliberate, every promise meant. Genevieve said her vows and felt the guilt go through her like a knife blade. She noticed, with a cold prickle at the back of her neck, that they were not alone in the courthouse. Silas Drummond sat in the back row watching. He had no business there. When the ceremony ended and they stepped outside into the glaring sun, Drummond was waiting on the steps. "Congratulations to the newlyweds," he said, tipping his hat. "I trust the new Mrs. Kane knows that your property sits right between two parcels of mine. Good neighbors ought to know each other." Lucas' jaw tightened. Genevieve felt the shadow of something large and dangerous fall across what should have been the happiest moment of her new life. Lucas drove her to the ranch that afternoon. The cabin looked different now that it was her home. Smaller, maybe, but also more solid, more real. Lucas carried her trunk inside and showed her around, pointing out where things were kept, how the stove worked, where the well was. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted. "Been living on beans and bacon mostly. I hope you will not mind if we figure out the kitchen together." "I learned a thing or two from Martha," Genevieve said. "I think we can do better than beans and bacon." That evening they cooked supper side by side in the small kitchen, navigating around each other with the careful courtesy of two strangers sharing a space for the first time. Lucas followed her instructions for biscuits and gravy with serious concentration, and when they sat down to eat, the food was plain but good, and the silence between them felt more comfortable than strained. When darkness fell, Lucas cleared his throat. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that there is no rush on anything. You take the bed. I will sleep down here by the fire. We are still getting to know each other. I do not want you to feel pressured in any way." The kindness in his voice was almost worse than cruelty. Genevieve nodded and went upstairs to the sleeping loft. She lay in the bed and listened to Lucas settle in below, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of a blanket, the slow evening out of his breathing as he fell asleep. When she was sure he was sleeping, she loosened the corset, drew a full breath for the first time that day, pressed her hands against her belly in the darkness, and felt the firm curve that was growing more obvious by the week. The clock was ticking. The lie was growing, just like the child. The next morning, Lucas woke her early. His face was hard and his voice was tight. "Somebody cut the north fence line last night," he said. 12 head wandered onto Drummond land. I need to ride out and find them." He was gone before she could respond. Genevieve stood alone in front of the cabin, one hand resting on her belly, and looked out at the vast and empty landscape that was now supposed to be her home. She was not just hiding a secret anymore. She was hiding a person, and that person was growing bigger every day. She spent the day learning the rhythms of the ranch, fed the chickens, hauled water from the well, attempted to organize the pantry, which had the disordered look of a man who ate to survive rather than for pleasure. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees because it needed doing, and because the work kept her mind from circling back to the same impossible question. How long could she hide this? Lucas returned in the late afternoon, dusty and grim. He had found the cattle on Drummond land, and Drummond men had made a show of being helpful while making it clear the strays had caused damage to their fencing. "It is going to cost me," Lucas said, washing his face at the basin. "Drummond will send a bill. He always does." Genevieve heard something in his voice she had not heard before. Not anger exactly, weariness, the sound of a man fighting a battle on too many fronts. "Can I help?" she said. Lucas looked at her. Something in his expression softened. "You already did." "I came home to a clean house and supper on the stove." That is more than I have had in a long time." She turned away before he could see her face, because the tenderness in his voice made the guilt so sharp she could barely stand it. That night she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms together until they ached. She thought about what Martha had said, about every person who had ever walked away from Lucas Kane. His father, dead before Lucas could remember him. His mother, destroyed by a man she trusted. The first mail-order bride, vanished without a word. And now Genevieve, who was lying to him every moment of every day. She told herself she would find the right time. She told herself she would tell him soon. She told herself the words would come. She told herself a lot of things that night. None of them were true. Over the following days, the lie settled into the routine of their new life together, like a stone at the bottom of a well. Always there, always heavy, always out of sight. Lucas worked from dawn until dusk, mending fences, riding the range, tending cattle. He came home tired every evening, but always asked about her day, always offered to help with whatever she was doing. He treated her with a respect she had never experienced from the men in Philadelphia, where courtesy was performance and attention was currency. Lucas was courteous because it was simply who he was. Genevieve kept the cabin clean, learned to cook on the cast-iron stove, tended the chickens, and started a vegetable garden with seeds Martha had given her. She wore loose dresses and tied her apron high. She never changed clothes when Lucas was in the cabin. She wrapped a shawl around her waist, even in the heat. And every night, after Lucas fell asleep by the fireplace, she loosened her corset and breathed and pressed her hands against the growing evidence of her deception, and wondered when the whole fragile structure of her new life would come crashing down. The hen pecked Genevieve's hand for the third time that morning, and she was beginning to understand why Lucas kept a shotgun in the chicken coop. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding. June had settled over the Utah territory like a furnace, and Genevieve was learning that frontier life was nothing like the novels she had read back in Philadelphia. It was harder, dirtier, more exhausting, and more satisfying than anything she had ever experienced. Lucas taught her to shoot on a Tuesday afternoon. He set up a row of tin cans on the fence rail behind the barn and handed her his Winchester rifle, showing her how to brace the stock against her shoulder and sight along the barrel. "Squeeze the trigger," he said. "Do not pull it. Nice and slow." The rifle kicked hard enough to knock her back a step, and the shot went so wide it did not even disturb the dust near the cans. Lucas did not laugh. He simply adjusted her stance, showed her again, and stepped back. She missed 20 times. Her shoulder ached, her ears rang. But on the 21st shot, the centercan flew off the rail with a satisfying clang, and Genevieve let out a whoop of surprise and delight that echoed off the mountains. Lucas watched her laugh, and something moved through his chest like warmth, like whiskey, like sunlight hitting a cold room. He had been falling in love with her by degrees, and he knew it, and he could not seem to stop it. She was not what he expected. She was better. She was afraid of almost everything out here. The snakes, the vastness, the strange noises at night, but she faced every fear with a jaw-set determination that reminded him of his mother in her best years, before the world broke her down. Genevieve fell and got up. She was scared and did it anyway, and that, Lucas was discovering, was worth more to him than beauty or breeding or any of the things he had thought he wanted when he placed that advertisement. But something was not right. He knew it the way he knew weather was coming by the way the clouds sat on the mountains. He could not name it, but he felt it. She always changed clothes when he was out of the cabin. She wrapped that shawl around her waist even when the heat was punishing. Some nights he heard her crying softly, thinking he was asleep. And there were moments when the firelight caught her just so, when she stood in profile against the orange glow, and he thought he saw a curve to her figure that had not been there when she arrived, a roundness, a fullness. She is eating better, he told himself. The frontier fills people out. You're imagining things because you're afraid of losing another one. Do not ruin this by looking for problems that are not there. He wanted to believe in her so badly that he told himself the lie and accepted it, because the alternative was unbearable. One afternoon, while Lucas was out checking the far pasture, Genevieve was hoeing the vegetable garden when she heard the dry, papery rattle that Lucas had warned her about. She looked down and saw the rattlesnake coiled 3 feet from her boot, its flat head raised, its tail vibrating. For one horrible second, she froze. Then something deeper than fear took over. She raised the hoe above her head and brought it down hard. The blade caught the snake just behind the head, and she struck again and again until the rattling stopped. When Lucas came home that evening, she showed him the dead snake laid out by the garden fence. "Rattler," she said. "About 4 feet long. I got it with the hoe." Lucas stared at her, then at the snake, then back at her. He looked equal parts impressed and horrified. "You should have come to find me. You were 2 hours away. The snake was 2 feet away. I handled it." He shook his head slowly, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "Genevieve Morrison Kane," he said. "I do not know whether to be proud of you or terrified." She smiled. "Both seems reasonable." That night, a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains with a violence Genevieve had never experienced. The sky turned black and then split open with lightning that seemed to strike the ground right outside the cabin. Thunder shook the walls. Rain hammered the roof so hard that normal speech was impossible. Genevieve sat on the bed in the sleeping loft, her arms wrapped around her knees, trembling. She had been afraid of storms since childhood, since the night lightning struck the oak tree outside her bedroom window in Philadelphia, and the sound of it had woken something primal in her that she had never been able to quiet. Lucas came up the ladder. He took one look at her and sat down on the edge of the bed. He did not mock her. He did not tell her there was nothing to be afraid of. He simply picked up the poetry book from the bedside table, the one he had bought from a catalog in Salt Lake City, and began to read aloud. His voice was low and steady, and it cut through the noise of the storm the way a lamp cuts through darkness. He read poem after poem, not performing, just speaking the words in that plain, honest way he had of doing everything. And gradually Genevieve felt her breathing slow, and her trembling ease, and her eyes grow heavy. She fell asleep to the sound of his voice and the rain. In the morning she woke to find Lucas gone, already out working. But the poetry book was open on the table beside the bed, a page marked with a slip of paper. She looked at the poem. It was about trust. She pressed her hand against her heart and felt it break a little. That same day, while Lucas was mending the south fence line, a rider appeared at the cabin. Genevieve was in the garden when she heard the hoofbeats and looked up to see a man she did not recognize. He was lean and rough-looking, with a week of stubble and eyes that moved too quickly over the property. "Afternoon, Ma," he said, not dismounting. "I seem to have gotten myself turned around. Mind if I water my horse?" Genevieve studied him. Something about his manner felt wrong. He was not looking at her. He was looking past her, at the cabin, the barn, the corral, counting horses, estimating the lay of the land. "Of course," she said. "The well is right there." He watered his horse slowly, too slowly. He asked how many hands worked the ranch. He asked if her husband was around much during the day. He asked how far it was to the nearest neighbor. Genevieve remembered her shooting lessons. She walked calmly to the cabin door and retrieved the Winchester rifle. She did not point it at anyone. She simply leaned it against the door frame where the man could see it clearly. "My husband will be back shortly," she said. "You are welcome to wait for him if you would like." The man looked at the rifle, looked at her, tipped his hat, and rode away without another word. When Lucas returned and she described the visitor, his face went hard. "That sounds like one of Drummond's men," he said. "He was scouting us, seeing what we have, how many people are here, where the weak points are." He looked at Genevieve with something new in his eyes. Quick thinking with the rifle. "You taught me well," she said, and she meant it in more ways than he knew. That evening, after Genevieve fell asleep, Lucas walked out behind the barn to the spot where he had buried a small tin box 2 years ago. Inside was his mother Bible and her wedding ring, the only things he had left of her. He knelt in the dirt and spoke quietly. "I think I found her, Mama. I think you would like her. She is brave and she is kind and she works harder than anybody I have ever seen. I just hope she stays. I hope this time somebody stays." He knelt there for a while in the dark, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of the creek, and then he went back inside and lay down by the fireplace. That night, for the first time, Genevieve fell asleep without wrapping the shawl around her waist. And Lucas, lying by the fireplace, stared at the ceiling and told himself that the curve he had glimpsed in the firelight was nothing. Just shadows. Just his imagination. Just the lie he needed to believe a little longer. But he also noticed the next morning that the creek behind the cabin was running thinner than it should for this time of year. The water that had been knee-deep in May was barely ankle-deep now. He made a mental note to ride upstream and check for obstructions. But the fencing work was urgent, and the days were never long enough. He filed it away and moved on. There were too many things to worry about already. Genevieve did not intend for Lucas to find out this way. Not in the middle of the general store, not in front of Silas Drummond, and certainly not while she was lying on the floor. It was a Monday in late June, nearly 5 months into her pregnancy, and the corset had become an instrument of torture. She had let it out as far as the lacing would allow, but the growing child inside her had its own ideas about space, and the boning dug into her ribs with every breath. She told herself she could manage one more trip to town, just long enough to buy supplies and get back to the ranch. The general store was busy that morning. Several ranch wives were shopping, the minister wife among them, and a cluster of men stood near the counter talking cattle prices. Genevieve kept her head down and her shawl tight and moved through the aisles quickly, gathering flour and sugar and coffee and the tinned peaches Lucas liked. She reached for a jar of preserves on the top shelf, stretched up on her toes. The corset compressed her lungs, the room tilted sideways, and the last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the jar falling from the shelf toward her face. She woke up on the floor with Mrs. Schultz kneeling over her. The German midwife had been in the store buying thread, and she had reached Genevieve first. She had loosened the corset ties with practiced hands, pulling the boning away from Genevieve's ribs to let her breathe. And in doing so, she had revealed what the corset had been hiding. Genevieve's 5-month belly pressed against the fabric of her dress, round and undeniable, in full view of every person in the store. The silence was enormous. Genevieve looked up at the ring of faces staring down at her. She saw shock. She saw judgment. She saw the minister wife mouth fall open and then snap shut into a thin line of righteous satisfaction. And she saw, standing near the door with his arms crossed, Silas Drummond. He was not shocked. He was smiling. Mrs. Schultz helped her sit up. "You need to stop wearing that corset," she said bluntly. "You're going to hurt yourself and the baby." Genevieve could not speak. The store had erupted in whispers, and she could hear fragments of them cutting through the air like thrown glass. Mail order bride. Pregnant already. Another man-child. Does Lucas know? She got to her feet somehow, gathered her packages with numb hands, walked out of the store with her head down and the whispers following her like dogs. Martha found her at the boarding house, sitting in the upstairs room with her trunk open, staring at the contents without seeing them. Martha took one look at her face and said, "I will ride out to the ranch. Lucas needs to hear this from you, not from town gossip." But Martha was already too late. Lucas had been riding toward town when he met Silas Drummond on the road. Drummond pulled up alongside him and tipped his hat with that cold courtesy that always made Lucas' skin crawl. "Afternoon, Kane? I hear congratulations are in order. Seems your mail-order bride brought along more than a trunk of belongings." The words hit Lucas like a fist. "What are you talking about?" Drummond's smile widened. "Ask your wife, or ask anyone in town. They all saw it when she fainted in the general store. That little secret of hers is not so little anymore." He rode away, and Lucas sat motionless on his horse for a long time, feeling the ground shift under everything he thought he knew. And in that moment, every sign he had chosen to ignore came flooding back. The shawl, the changing clothes when he was out, the curve in the firelight that he had explained away as shadows and better eating, the night she cried when she thought he was sleeping. The worst part was not that she had lied to him. The worst part was that somewhere underneath, in a place he had refused to look, he had known. He had seen the signs and told himself they meant nothing because he wanted to believe in her so desperately that he had lied to himself. She deceived him, but he had helped. He rode to the cabin. Genevieve was sitting at the kitchen table, white as paper, her hands flat on the wood. She had taken off the corset. Her belly was visible now through the cotton dress, and looking at it, Lucas felt the confirmation of everything he had been pretending not to see hit him like a physical blow. He did not shout. He did not slam the table. He closed the door behind him and stood in the dim light and said nothing. The silence was worse than yelling. Genevieve had grown up in a household where anger was loud, where her father's voice could rattle the windows. She knew what to do with shouting. She had no idea what to do with this terrible, airless quiet. "You lied to me," Lucas said finally. His voice was flat, controlled, each word placed like a stone. From the very first letter. "My family wrote the first letter," Genevieve said. "But every letter after that, every word I wrote to you was true. Except the part where you forgot to mention another man-child growing inside you." Genevieve flinched, but did not look away. She told him everything. Edward Hale, the betrayal, the pregnancy discovered too late, her family fury and shame. Aunt Clara writing the first letter without Genevieve knowledge, the $300 and the one-way ticket. All of it laid out on the table between them like a hand of cards she had been hiding for too long. When she finished, she said the words she had practiced and the words she had not. "You have every right to annul the marriage. I will not fight you. I will leave tomorrow if you want me gone. But I need you to know. These weeks here with you have been the most honest time of my life, even if that sounds impossibly contradictory." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out the door. But he did not go to the barn. He rode into town to the boarding house, and he found Martha in the kitchen, and he said, "You knew. From the very first day you knew." Martha did not deny it. "I knew. You could have told me." "Told you so you could do what, Lucas? Send her away, a pregnant girl alone in the middle of nowhere." "You had me," Lucas said, and his voice cracked for the first time. "You could have trusted me with the truth. Could I?" Martha met his eyes steadily. "Would you have married her if you had known?" Lucas had no answer, because Martha was right, and that was the worst part of all. He rode out of town and kept riding. Past his ranch, past the boundary fences, past everything familiar, riding through the darkness because he could not stand to be still. Behind him in the cabin, Genevieve sat through the night and listened for hoofbeats that never came. She listened until the sky turned gray with dawn, and the birds started up in the cottonwoods by the creek. Then she stood and began packing her trunk. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she did not want to make Lucas be the one to tell her to go. Lucas Kane had ridden 30 miles through the dark, and when he stopped on the bank of the Colorado River at dawn, he realized he was not running from Genevieve. He was running from admitting that he still wanted her to stay. He sat on a flat rock beside the water and watched the sun come up over the desert. The river was running low, as everything seemed to be running low this summer, but it still caught the light and threw it back in broken pieces of gold and white. His mother face came to him unbidden. Not the face at the end, thin and gray and defeated, but the face from before, from when he was small, when she still laughed and sang hymns while she cooked and believed that the world was basically kind. She had trusted a man named Harold Becker. She had married him 18 months after Lucas' father was killed at Shiloh, because she was alone with a small child and no income, and Becker had seemed decent and reliable. Becker had taken everything, the farm, the savings, even the furniture. He had disappeared one morning while Lucas' mother was at church, and she had come home to an empty house and a note that said simply, "Sorry." She never recovered. She worked herself to bone and sinew trying to keep Lucas fed, moving from town to town, taking in washing, scrubbing other people's floors. She died 5 years ago in a rented room in St. Louis with nothing to her name but a Bible and a wedding ring, and a son who swore he would never let anyone deceive him again. Genevieve had broken that oath. But the details kept intruding. Genevieve standing in the garden with the dead rattlesnake at her feet, calm as Sunday morning. Genevieve laughing when she hit the tin can on her 21st try. Genevieve singing quietly while she cooked, songs he did not recognize from some other life far away. The blisters on her hands after her first wash day, raw and red and weeping, and the way she had not said one word of complaint. She was not a con artist. She was not Harold Becker. She was a desperate woman who had been thrown out by her own family and had nowhere left to turn. And he had known. That was the part that burned worst. He had seen the signs and talked himself out of them because he could not bear to lose another one. She had deceived him, yes, but he had helped by choosing to look away. He sat by the river for a long time, turning it over and over like a stone in his hand. In the late morning, an old Navajo man appeared on the bank upstream, carrying a fishing line made of braided horsehair. He nodded to Lucas with the easy courtesy of someone who had fished this spot for decades and was not going to be bothered by a stranger presence. He settled on a rock and cast his line and said nothing for a long while. Eventually, without looking up from the water, the old man said, "You have the look of a man arguing with himself." Lucas let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That obvious? The river does not lie," the old man said. "Neither does a man face when he sits beside it." Lucas found himself talking. Not the whole story, just the bones of it. A woman who had lied to him. A truth he had not wanted to see. A choice he did not know how to make. The old man listened. When Lucas finished, the fisherman was quiet for a while. Then he said, "A wild horse is not bad because it is afraid. It becomes bad only when no one gives it a reason to trust." He reeled in his line, nodded to Lucas, and walked away along the riverbank. Lucas watched him go and sat with those words for another hour. In the late afternoon, he rode back. He saw her before she saw him. She was in the north pasture, the one where Drummond men had cut the fence, and she was mending it. Alone, in the brutal sun. Her belly was visible now, the dress pulled tight across it, and her hands were bloody from the barbed wire. But she was pulling the wire taut and twisting it around the post with the grim determination of someone who had decided to fight for something whether or not it still belonged to her. She was not sitting in the cabin weeping. She was not packed and waiting for the stagecoach. She was fixing his fence. Lucas dismounted. He stood at the edge of the pasture and watched her for a moment. She saw him and went still, the wire still in her bleeding hands, and her face was a mixture of hope and terror that made his chest ache. He walked toward her, stopped a few feet away. He looked at her hands, scratched, torn, bleeding from the barbs. These were not the hands of a woman who planned to leave. "I do not know yet if I can forgive you," he said. His voice was quiet and rough, like a road that had taken too much traffic. "But I know I do not want you to go, and I know that fence needs 2 people to fix it." He bent down and picked up the pliers, stood beside her. And they worked together in silence until the sun went down, not touching, not speaking, just pulling wire and setting posts side by side while the shadows of the Abajo Mountains stretched long and purple across the grass. When they went inside, Lucas did not go to the fireplace. He sat at the kitchen table and began cleaning his rifle, which did not need cleaning but gave his hands something to do. Without looking up, he said, "From now on, you do not hide anything from me. Nothing. Ever." "Nothing," Genevieve said. "Ever." It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, tucked between a seed invoice and a farm equipment catalog. But the postmark was from Philadelphia, and the handwriting on the envelope made Genevieve grip the doorframe to keep from falling. She knew that handwriting. She had seen it on notes passed across a candlelit dinner table, on the card attached to a bouquet of roses, on the promise scrawled on the back of a theater program. "I will take care of everything." He had written that. Edward Hale had written that, and then vanished across an ocean. She opened the letter with shaking hands. Edward wrote with the same polished charm he had used on everything else in his life. But beneath the smooth words, the threat was clear. He knew where she was. He knew she had married, and he knew about the baby. If she did not send him $500 within 30 days, he would come to Monticello personally to claim his rights as the child father, and create such a scandal that neither she nor her cowboy husband would be able to show their faces in the territory again. His real purpose was not the child. It was never the child. He wanted leverage to extort her family back in Philadelphia. The Morrisons had money, and Edward needed money because his new wife family fortune was not as large as he had believed. Genevieve read the letter twice. The first time, fear hit her like ice water. The second time, something else rose up through the fear. Something hot and sharp and unfamiliar. Anger. For the first time since the night Edward had turned pale at her news and vanished from her life, Genevieve did not feel ashamed. She felt furious. This man had ruined her, had abandoned her, had fled to Europe with another woman, while Genevieve was cast out by her own family. And now he dared to threaten her from across an ocean, as though she were still the naive girl who had believed his promises. She was not that girl anymore. That girl had died somewhere between Philadelphia and Monticello, and the woman who had replaced her was not afraid of a coward with a pen. She showed Lucas the letter immediately. She put it in his hands and watched him read it, and did not try to soften or explain. Lucas read the letter once. Then he folded it carefully and carried it to the fireplace and struck a match. "He has no claim," Lucas said, watching the paper curl and blacken. "You are my wife. This child will carry the name Cain. The law is on our side." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time since the truth had broken open between them, she saw something in his eyes that was not caution or wounded pride. She saw resolve. "Nobody threatens my family," he said quietly. "Nobody. This child will carry the name Cain." Genevieve held those words inside her chest and felt something shift, something that had been off balance for months finally settling into place. He was not just choosing her. He was choosing the baby. But Edward Letter was not the only threat closing in. That same week, the creek on Lucas land stopped running entirely. One morning it was there, thin but flowing. The next morning it was a dry bed of pale stones. Lucas saddled his horse and rode upstream, following the creek bed across his property and onto the open range beyond. After 2 hours of riding, he found what he was looking for. On Silas Drummond land, at a narrow point where the creek passed between two rock formations, a dam had been built. Not a crude pile of brush and mud, but a proper dam, logs and stones and packed earth, the work of several men over several days. The water that should have been flowing onto Lucas land was backing up into a growing pool on Drummond's side of the boundary. His cattle had water. Lucas' cattle did not. Lucas dismounted and stood looking at the dam and doing the math in his head. Without water, the herd would start dying within 3 weeks. The first hard freeze was coming in 6 weeks. If he lost the cattle before winter, the ranch was finished. He rode to the dam site and found Silas Drummond there, as though he had been waiting. "I see you found my new improvement," Drummond said pleasantly. "Built it on my own land, mind you. Perfectly within my rights. You know what this does to my operation. I know exactly what it does." Drummond leaned forward in his saddle. "That is why I am prepared to offer you one last chance. Sell me your land. Take $800. Take your pretty bride somewhere else and start fresh. That is the best offer you will get, Cain." "No." Drummond's face went flat and cold. "Then you will lose everything. The land, the cattle, and maybe more than that." Lucas rode home in the dark. The anger in him was so hot it felt like fever. But underneath the anger was fear, and underneath the fear was the growing certainty that he could not fight this alone. That night, for the first time, he asked Genevieve what she thought they should do. She did not hesitate. "We file a legal challenge," she said. "The doctrine of prior appropriation. It governs water rights in the Western Territories. You filed your claim and established water use before Drummond built that dam. Under territorial law, his dam is illegal because it interferes with a senior water right. The law is clear. Lucas stared at her. How do you know about water rights doctrine? My father is a merchant. I grew up listening to men argue about contracts and property law at his dinner table. I never thought it would be useful. She met his eyes. I was wrong. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said slowly, I think I married a smarter woman than I knew. Genevieve felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. For the first time, she had contributed something that mattered. Not cooking or cleaning or mending, but knowledge. The one thing she had brought from her old life that no one, not her family, not Edward, not the whispering women of Monticello, could take away from her. They stayed up late making plans. Genevieve would draft the legal filing. Lucas would start digging a backup well. They would fight Drummond with law and labor, and they would not give up. They planned to start digging the well at first light. But when Lucas woke at dawn and looked through the window, the horse barn was on fire. The fire smelled like pine pitch and dry grass, and Genevieve Morrison Kane, the girl who once could not light a hearth, was running through black smoke to throw open the barn doors. She had smelled it before she saw it, the sharp tang of burning wood cutting through the cool dawn air. She was out of bed and moving before Lucas, who had been sleeping deeper these days from exhaustion. And by the time he pulled on his boots and burst outside, she was already at the barn. The north wall was fully engulfed. Orange flames climbed the dry timber like living things, and the heat pushed her back 3 steps before she braced herself and ran for the doors. The horses were screaming inside, that terrible high sound that an animal makes when it knows it might die. Genevieve threw the latch and hauled the doors open, and the 2 horses plunged past her in a wild-eyed panic, one of them clipping her shoulder hard enough to spin her sideways. Lucas was there then, with buckets from the well throwing water on the walls. But the north wall was lost. The fire was spreading east toward the chicken coop, and from the chicken coop it would reach the cabin. Genevieve did not wait for instructions. She ran to the old well pump on the east side of the property and started hauling water. Bucket after bucket, her arms burning, her lungs full of smoke, her pregnant belly making every movement harder. She soaked the ground between the chicken coop and the barn, creating a wet line that the fire could not easily cross. It took 2 hours. When the last embers were out, the barn was half destroyed, the north wall gone entirely and the roof sagging inward. But the chicken coop stood, the cabin stood. Both horses were alive, though one had singed its mane and the other was limping from panic. Lucas walked through the ashes. He stopped and bent down and picked something up. A kerosene can, dented and blackened, but unmistakable. Arson, he said. His voice was dead calm, which Genevieve was learning meant he was at his most dangerous. This was not lightning. This was not an accident. Someone poured kerosene on my barn and set it alight. They both knew who. Genevieve sat on the porch step and pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby move. Her hands were blistered and black with soot. Her dress was ruined, her shoulder throbbed where the horse had hit her. And she felt, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a fury so hot and clean, it clarified everything. I am going to town, she said. Lucas looked at her. Now. You need to stay with the livestock. I will go to the courthouse and file the complaint against Drummond. The water rights claim, the property damage, all of it. Genevieve, you are 7 months along, and Drummond burned our barn. She stood up. Which one of us knows territorial water law? Lucas looked at her for a long moment. Then something changed in his face, something she had not seen before. It was not worry. It was not protectiveness. It was respect. All right, he said, you ride careful. She saddled the remaining sound horse and rode into Monticello alone, belly visible, no corset, no shawl, no concealment of any kind. She tied the horse outside the courthouse and walked past the general store where she had fainted, past the cluster of women who stopped talking when they saw her, past the minister wife who stared with undisguised contempt. She walked with her shoulders back and her chin up and her ruined dress covered in soot and ash, and she did not look away from anyone. Inside the courthouse, she presented the complaint she had drafted to Judge Whitfield. It cited the specific territorial statute governing water rights under the doctrine of prior appropriation. It detailed the property damage from the cut fences and the arson. It was written in clear, precise legal language. The judge read it twice. He looked up at her over his spectacles. "Who drafted this filing, Mrs. Kane? It is more precise than half the attorneys I have seen in this territory." "I did, sir." He studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. "I will review this and take appropriate action. You have made a compelling case." She walked out of the courthouse and almost made it to her horse before the minister-wife blocked her path. "Mrs. Kane?" The woman's voice was tight with righteous judgment. "Have you no shame? Walking through town in your condition, flaunting your sin for all to see?" Genevieve stopped. She looked at this woman who had never done a harder day work than arranging flowers for the Sunday service, who had never pulled a rattlesnake from her garden, or fought a barn fire with her bare hands, or ridden 2 hours alone through open country to file a legal complaint. "I have been ashamed long enough, ma'am. Right now I am busy protecting my family." She walked past the woman and mounted her horse and rode home. Lucas was on the porch when she returned. He had been watching the road, and she could see the worry in the way he stood, weight forward, hands gripping the railing. When she dismounted and told him about the courthouse, about the judge, about the minister-wife, he looked at her with entirely new eyes. "Genevieve Kane," he said slowly, "I believe you are the bravest person I have ever known." And then he kissed her. Not the kiss at the wedding, which had been obligation and performance. This was the kiss he truly wanted to give her, and she truly wanted to return. It was the first real kiss between them, and it tasted like smoke and dust and something she did not have a name for, something that felt like the beginning of something real. When they pulled apart, he kept his hand on her cheek and said nothing, and nothing was exactly right. That evening, flushed with the day and the kiss and the feeling that she could take on anything the world threw at her, Genevieve sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to the judge, not to Martha, to Edward Hale. She wrote it quickly, the words coming from a place of certainty she had never felt before. "If you come to Monticello," she wrote, "I will write to your wife and to your father-in-law with a full account of how you abandoned your own child. I will provide dates, details, and the name of every person who knew of our association. You have far more to lose than I do. Do not write to me again." She sealed it and mailed it the next morning when she rode into town for supplies. She did not tell Lucas first. Martha saw her at the post office and mentioned it to Lucas when he came to town that afternoon. He came home and found Genevieve in the garden, and his face was not angry, but it was not happy either. "You told me about his letter," he said. "Good. I am glad you did. But then you handled it by yourself, like I am not even here, like my opinion does not count." "I was trying to protect us," Genevieve said. "We protect us," Lucas said. "Together. That is what this is. I am not your audience, Genevieve. I am your husband." She saw the hurt in his eyes and understood it. Being strong did not mean being alone. She had learned to fight, but she still needed to learn to fight alongside someone instead of in front of them. "You are right," she said. "I should have told you before I sent it. I am sorry." Lucas nodded. "For what it is worth, the letter was good. That man will not bother us again." They looked at each other across the garden, and something settled between them, a new understanding that had cost them both a bruise, but was worth the price. Edward Hale never wrote again. But the day was not finished with them. That evening, Genevieve found a second letter from Philadelphia in the stack of mail she had picked up in town. This one was not from Edward. It was from her father. She opened it at the kitchen table while Lucas was outside tending the horses. Her father's handwriting was rigid and precise, the script of a man who controlled everything in his world and intended to keep it that way. He knew she had married. He knew the ranch was in trouble. Edward had contacted the Morrison family seeking money, and in doing so had revealed Genevieve's location and circumstances. Her father's offer was cold and clear. If she dissolved the marriage and returned to Philadelphia, he would arrange a suitable match for her. The child would be placed with a respectable family. She would have a comfortable life again. A respectable life. As though respectability were the thing she had been missing all this time. It was not a threat. It was a temptation. And that made it worse, because buried beneath the anger and the insult, there was a part of Genevieve, a small and exhausted part, that heard her father's words and felt the pull of them. The comfort of a warm house, the safety of a known world, the absence of fear. She sat at the table long after Lucas came inside and fell asleep by the fireplace. On her left, her father led her. On her right, the poetry book Lucas had given her, the one he had read from during the thunderstorm, the one with the page marked at the poem about trust. 2 worlds, 2 lives. And she had to choose for the last time. The baby kicked hard against her palm, once, twice, as if demanding an answer. Genevieve sat in the lamplight with her father, neat handwriting on one side, and her husband dog-eared poetry on the other, and she did not move for a very long time. The baby decided to arrive on the worst possible night, in the teeth of October 1st blizzard, with the road to town buried under 3 feet of snow, and Silas Drummond finally making his last move. Before dawn, before the storm, Genevieve rose while Lucas slept. She moved quietly through the dark cabin to the fireplace, where the coals from last night's fire still glowed orange. She held her father's letter over the heat and watched the edges curl and darken. She did not hesitate. She did not read it one more time. She let it go and watched it burn. She did not plan to tell Lucas about it, not because she was hiding anything, but because it no longer mattered. The girl her father wanted back did not exist anymore. That girl had died somewhere on the road between Philadelphia and Monticello, and the woman standing here in a rough cotton dress with calloused hands and a belly full of somebody's future had no use for a dead girl choices. I came here because I had no choice, she thought, watching the last corner of the letter crumble to ash. I am staying because I do. The first snow started falling at noon. By mid-afternoon, the wind had picked up, driving the flakes sideways, and by dark, a full blizzard was howling down from the Abajo Mountains with a force that made the cabin walls groan. Lucas brought the horses into the barn, what was left of it, and made sure the cattle had shelter in the draw behind the ridge. He stacked wood by the door and checked the water supply, and did everything a careful rancher does when winter comes early and angry. But at 3 in the morning, Genevieve woke him by gripping his arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Lucas, something is happening." He was on his feet instantly. One look at her face told him everything. She was pale, her jaw clenched, and she was pressing both hands against the underside of her belly. "It is too early," she said through her teeth. "I am not due for 2 more weeks." But the baby did not care about due dates. The contractions were real and strong, and coming faster than either of them expected. Lucas felt panic rise in his chest like floodwater. Mrs. Schultz was in town, 5 miles away through a blizzard that had buried the road under 3 feet of snow. Martha was in town. Everyone was in town. They were alone. He must have looked as terrified as he felt, because Genevieve, between contractions, reached up and put her hand on his face. "I need you to be strong right now, Lucas. Can you do that for me?" He swallowed the fear, nodded. She told him what to do. "Boil water, find clean cloth, bring the lantern closer." She had talked with Mrs. Schultz during one of the midwife visits, and had asked the questions she needed to ask, and now she relayed the instructions with a calm that amazed him, even as her body was being torn apart by the work of bringing a new life into the world. He was building up the fire when the pounding came at the door. Lucas grabbed the Winchester and went to the door. He opened it 6 inches and peered into the howling white darkness. A man stood on the porch, covered in snow, his horse stamping and blowing behind him. Jack Tully, Silas Drummond, hired gun. Lucas raised the rifle. Jack raised both hands, palms out. His face was raw from the cold and something else. Something Lucas had never seen on that hard face before. Urgency. "I am not here for Drummond," Jack said. "I am here to warn you. Drummond hired men out of Durango to ride up to the dam tonight and blow it. Not to let the water through. to send a flood down the creek bed and wash out your ranch while the snowmelt is running high." Lucas stared at him. The wind screamed between them. From inside the cabin, Genevieve cried out as another contraction hit. "Why?" Lucas said. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack's face did not change. "I signed on to cut fences and scare people off their land. I did not sign on to kill a woman in childbirth." From inside the cabin, between gasps, Genevieve's voice came sharp and clear. "Lucas, let him go. We do not have time." Lucas looked at the man who had been his enemy for months. The man who had cut his fences and scouted his property and served the man who had tried to destroy everything Lucas built. "Why should I trust you? You should not. But you do not have another choice." A silence. Then Genevieve again, her voice strained but certain. "Let him go, Lucas. He is not lying. I can hear it. Let him go and come back inside. I need you here." The impossible choice hung in the frozen air. Leave the cabin to stop the dam, and Genevieve delivered alone in a blizzard. Stay, and the ranch drowned. Lucas looked at Jack. "Ride to the dam. Stop them or get word to the judge. Can you do that?" Jack nodded once. His face was unreadable, but his eyes flicked past Lucas to the sound of Genevieve laboring inside, and something human moved in them. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode into the blizzard. Lucas closed the door and went to his wife. The next hours were the longest of his life. Genevieve labored in the lamplight while the storm screamed outside, and Lucas did everything she told him to do, and tried not to show his terror when things seemed to go wrong. When the pauses between contractions grew shorter, when her face went gray and her grip on his hands became so fierce he thought the bones would crack. She held on to him. Her hands, rough and calloused and strong, the hands that had killed a rattlesnake and fought a barn fire and mended a barbed wire fence, gripped his with a power that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle. There were moments when he thought he was losing her, when her eyes went distant and her breathing turned shallow and the lamplight seemed to dim. He spoke to her then, not poetry, not reassurance, just her name over and over, like a rope thrown into dark water. "Genevieve, stay with me. Genevieve." And she did. She always did. The baby came at 4:17 in the morning, in the worst of the storm, when the wind was loudest and the snow was thickest and the world outside the cabin walls had disappeared into white and black and nothing. A boy, red-faced and furious and alive. He screamed once, a sound that tore through the storm like it owned the night, and Lucas took the child in his shaking hands and felt something break open inside him that he knew would never close again. "Hello, Tommy," he whispered. "Papa is here." He was crying. The first time in the entire story of his life that he could remember tears on his face since his mother's funeral. He held the baby, this tiny, impossible person who was not his by blood, but was his by every choice he had ever made, and he wept without shame. Genevieve lay back, exhausted beyond words, and watched her husband hold her son. Their son. Thomas Kane. And the last fragments of shame and fear that she had carried for so long fell away like old skin, and what was underneath was new and clean and hers. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, the other cradling his son. Outside the window, the blizzard still howled, and somewhere in the darkness, Jack Tully was riding through the snow to save the ranch he had once helped destroy. The storm broke by morning, and when the first sunlight came through the cabin window, it fell on 3 sleeping faces and a ranch still standing. Jack Tully had reached the dam. He had found Drummond men from Durango setting charges in the pre-dawn darkness, and he had fired 3 shots into the air, and then 3 more into the dam face above their heads, close enough to shower them with splinters, and they had scattered into the storm like rats from a lantern. He rode back to the Kane ranch by mid-morning, half frozen, his horse staggering with exhaustion. Lucas met him at the door. "It is done," Jack said. They ran. The dam held. He reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle of papers, letters in Drummond handwriting, directives to cut fences, instructions for the arson, payment receipts for the hired men. A list of every rancher Drummond had pressured into selling over the past 3 years. Jack held them out. I took these from his office last week. I figured if things went the way they were going, someone was going to need proof. Lucas took the papers. He looked at Jack for a long moment. Then he said, "There is coffee on the stove. Come inside and warm up before you fall over." It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. And Lucas Kane was learning that most worthwhile things started that way. He rode into town that morning with the evidence. He left Genevieve and Tommy sleeping, and he kissed them both before he left, and the tenderness of it surprised him because he was not a man who had ever thought of himself as tender. While he was gone, Silas Drummond came. Genevieve heard the hoofbeats and looked through the window and saw him. He was alone, which was unusual. He dismounted and tied his horse and climbed the porch steps, and Genevieve met him at the door with Tommy in one arm, and the Winchester leaning against the doorframe. Drummond looked at the baby, looked at her. He did not seem surprised to find her alone. "Mrs. Kane," he said. His voice was the same smooth, patient voice he always used, the voice of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I heard about the birth. Congratulations." Genevieve said nothing. She waited. "I will be direct," Drummond said. "You are a smart woman. Smarter than your husband, if you do not mind my saying so. You know this ranch is on borrowed time. The water situation alone will finish you before spring. And the rest of it, the whispers in town, the mail-order bride with someone else's child, that will follow you as long as you stay here." He paused. "Let me buy the land. I will pay a fair price. Enough for you and Lucas and that baby to start fresh somewhere clean, somewhere nobody knows your history." Genevieve looked at Silas Drummond. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at this country, straight on without flinching, taking the full measure of what stood before her. 6 months ago, this man's words would have cut her to the bone. 6 months ago, she would have dropped her eyes and felt the shame burn through her, and maybe, just maybe, she would have said yes. But 6 months ago, she had been someone else. "You look at me," Genevieve said, "and you see a girl who can be frightened into running. But I am not that girl anymore. This is my home. My husband built it, and I have bled for it, and our son was born in it during the worst storm this territory has seen in 20 years. There is nothing you can say or do that will make me leave." She shifted Tommy to her other arm, and her free hand came to rest on the stock of the Winchester. "You can leave on your own, Mr. Drummond, or you can wait here until my husband gets back. I would recommend the first option." Drummond studied her face. He was a man who understood power, who had built an empire on knowing when people were bluffing and when they were not. He looked into Genevieve's eyes and saw something he had not expected to find there. He had already lost. Not to Lucas, not to the judge, to her. He turned without another word, mounted his horse, and rode toward town, where Judge Whitfield was waiting with a warrant. The county sheriff arrested Silas Drummond at his ranch that afternoon. He was taken in irons to the San Juan County Jail to await trial before the territorial court. The charges included destruction of property, arson, illegal water diversion, and conspiracy to commit further acts of sabotage against neighboring ranchers. If convicted, he would be sentenced to the Utah Territorial Prison at Sugar House, south of Salt Lake City. When the sheriff let him out, Drummond looked at Lucas and said, "You will regret this, Kane." But his voice had no power in it anymore. It was the voice of a man who had already lost and was only now realizing it. The days after were quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, not empty but full of settling, of things finding their new places. Mrs. Schultz came out to the ranch as soon as the roads cleared and examined Tommy and Genevieve and pronounced them both healthy and strong. She scolded Genevieve for the corset wearing, praised Lucas for his work as a midwife, and stayed for supper. Martha came too, bringing food and gossip, and a tenderness she would have denied if anyone had accused her of it. She held Tommy with practiced arms and looked at Genevieve with something that might have been pride. "The town has changed its tune about you," Martha said. "They heard about you filing that legal complaint 7 months along. They heard about the barn fire. They heard about the blizzard birth. People are saying you are the toughest woman in San Juan County." I do not need them to think I am tough, Genevieve said. I just need them to mind their own business. Martha laughed. That might take another generation or two, but it is a start. Even the minister wife sent a basket of bread and preserves to the ranch. No note of apology. Just a card that read, "Wishing mother and baby good health." It was small, but it was enough. The creek was running again. With Drummond under arrest, the territorial judge had ordered the dam removed, and the water was flowing through Lucas land the way it had for years before Drummond decided to play God with it. The cattle drank, the well held. The new barn timber was stacked and waiting for raising. 2 weeks after Tommy's birth, on a cool November morning, Genevieve was nursing the baby on the porch when the mail carrier came up the road on his mule. He handed her a single letter. The handwriting on the envelope was her mother. Genevieve held it for a long time before she opened it. She had not heard from her family since the day they put her on a train with $300 and a one-way ticket and told her not to come back until the scandal had faded. That was 7 months ago. It felt like 7 years. Her mother letter was brief. She had heard Genevieve married. She wanted to know if Genevieve was well. She wanted to know if there was a grandchild. The tone was cautious, the handwriting less certain than Genevieve remembered, as though the pen had paused many times. There was no apology. But there was one line near the end that Genevieve read 3 times. Your father says that if your husband is a decent man, perhaps in the spring we might write more often. Genevieve folded the letter. She did not cry. She did not feel anger. She felt something quieter than either, something like the space between 2 breaths. She set the letter on the kitchen table. Not burned, not thrown away, not answered, just set down. Lucas appeared in the doorway, pulling on his gloves, ready to ride out to check on the cattle. He saw her face. Bad news, he said. Genevieve looked at him. News that is not finished yet, she said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. He kissed her forehead. He kissed Tommy's head. He picked up his hat and walked to the door. She followed him out to the porch and stood watching as he mounted his horse. He turned in the saddle to look back at her, and for a moment the morning light caught them both, the man on the horse and the woman on the porch with the baby in her arms, and the mountains rising blue and gold behind them, and the creek glittering in the distance, running full and clear. He touched his hat brim to her. The same gesture he had made the first day they met when she stepped off the stagecoach into a world she did not know. The same gesture, a different world. She watched him ride out toward the cattle. Then she looked down at Tommy, sleeping against her chest, his small fingers curled around the edge of her collar. Your grandmother sent a letter today, she said quietly. Maybe someday I will write back. But not today. Today is ours. She sat on the porch and leaned back and closed her eyes. She listened to the hoofbeats fading into distance and the creek murmuring its quiet, endless song. She looked down at her hands, the hands wrapped around a sleeping child who bore his father's name by choice and not by blood. They were not the hands of a Philadelphia debutante. Not anymore. They were rough and scarred and strong. They were the hands that had killed a rattlesnake and mended a barbed wire fence and fought a barn fire and written a legal brief and brought a baby into the world in the middle of a blizzard. They were the hands that had built a home. She had been sent west in shame, but she had stayed for love. And that was the only thing that mattered.